Margaret Harper drove down the narrow, winding road that led to Crystal Lake with a light flutter in her chest. She had dreamed of this moment for years, leaving behind the noise of the city, the endless meetings, and the constant hum of traffic. Now, at 62, freshly retired from teaching, she was finally free to make her own hours, her own plans, and her very own lakeside cabin. As she turned onto the gravel driveway, the tall pines framed a small wooden house with blue shutters and a stone chimney. The cabin did not look grand, but to Margaret, it was perfect. She parked her car and stepped onto the porch. A light breeze carried the scent of pine needles and fresh water. Margaret breathed in deeply, held the air for a moment, then let it out in a long, satisfied sigh. She unlocked the front door, and it creaked open to reveal a cozy living room. A soft rug covered the wooden floor, and in the corner sat an armchair that seemed to invite her to sit. Sunlight streamed in through a window, casting a warm glow over a small writing desk. Margaret smiled. She pictured herself here every morning with a cup of tea, writing letters to old friends, or perhaps starting a journal. Inside, she moved carefully, as if stepping into a dream she did not want to break.
Al?
She ran her fingers over the mantel above the fireplace. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and something else, maybe lavender. The previous owner must have left behind little sachets. Margaret planned to plant lavender outside, but for today she would let this gentle scent remind her that this place was already welcoming her. She carried a small box of belongings into the kitchen. There she set down her favorite tea mug, the one with bright yellow daffodils painted on it. She filled the kettle, turned on the stove, and leaned against the counter, listening to the soft hiss of water heating.
Outside the window.
A blue jay hopped along the fence. Margaret watched it for a moment, marveling at how alive everything seemed here. Even the simplest bird felt special. When the tea was ready, she poured steaming water into her mug and settled into the armchair. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, closed her eyes, and thought of her first morning here. No alarm clock would ring. No traffic sirens would shout. Instead, she would wake to bird song and the gentle lap of water at the shore. Her heart filled with calm. After finishing her tea, she decided to explore the property. She stepped outside and walked down the grassy slope to the water's edge. The lake stretched out like a mirror, smooth as glass, reflecting the sky's pale blue. A small wooden dock extended into the water, and Margaret ran her hand along its sun-warmed rails. The planks felt sturdy under her palm. She imagined placing a small boat here someday, or perhaps tying a canoe and paddling across the calm surface at dawn. She lingered there, feeling the peace seep into her bones. In all her life, she had never felt such calm. She closed her eyes, tilted her head back, and let the sun warm her face. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out with its haunting cry. Margaret held her breath, listening. It was a sound she had heard only once before, as a child on family vacation. Now it felt like a blessing. After a while, she wandered back, toward the cabin, noticing small details she might change or keep. The flower boxes under the windows were empty but in good repair. She made a mental note to fill them with bright red geraniums. She saw a narrow stone path leading to the backyard and thought about planting herbs along it: basil, rosemary, perhaps some chamomile for tea. The possibilities made her smile. As afternoon approached, she heard the soft rumble of a vehicle. On the main road, curious, she walked toward the edge of her property and saw a neighbor driving by in a blue pickup truck. He waved, and Margaret waved back. He slowed and stopped at her driveway. The man introduced himself as Tom Green. He lived 2 cabins down the road. In his late 50s, he wore a baseball cap and carried a friendly grin. "Welcome to Crystal Lake," he said. "I'm Tom. I've lived here with my wife for 10 years. If you need anything, tools, directions, or just company, just holler." Margaret thanked him and told him how happy she was to be here. Tom offered a quick tour of the neighborhood after he finished some work, and Margaret agreed. They walked together down the road, passing a handful of cabins nestled among the trees. Each looked different. Some were painted bright colors, others left natural wood. All had their own character. Tom pointed out where the nearest general store was, where she could pick up groceries, and mentioned that there was a small community garden where people shared vegetables by the end of the tour. Margaret felt part of something. Tom invited her to the weekend potluck at the community center nearby. Margaret hesitated, imagining strangers in a room. But Tom assured her it was a friendly gathering: potatoes, casseroles, fresh salads, and pie. He agreed to come and waved goodbye. As he drove off, back at her cabin, she unpacked a few more boxes. In one box was a framed photograph of her late husband David, taken on their 30th anniversary cruise. Margaret placed the photo on the writing desk and smiled at David's gentle eyes. She missed him every day, but here in this place of quiet beauty, she felt she could talk to him again in her mind. She told him about the cabin, the dock, the J, and the loon. She said she hoped he approved. As evening drew near, the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the lake in gold and orange. Margaret stepped outside again, feeling the chill as the air cooled. She lit a small fire in the outdoor fire pit, a circle of stones and ashes in her backyard. The smell of burning wood rose around her. She held her hands to the warmth and watched sparks drift upward like tiny fireflies. She roasted a marshmallow for a simple snack and remembered childhood. Nights around campfires, singing silly songs and telling stories. But here alone, she found solace. She let her mind wander through memories both happy and sad, embracing them all under the twilight sky. Inside the cabin, the lights glowed softly. Margaret changed into comfortable clothes and prepared a light dinner of soup and bread. She ate. At the small wooden table by the window, starlight shimmered on the lake's surface beyond. She thought of Tom's invitation and felt a flutter of excitement. Maybe tomorrow she would visit the general store. Maybe she would go to the potluck. Maybe she would borrow Tom's tools and build a birdhouse. That night, Margaret climbed into bed, slipping between fresh sheets. She lay on her back, listening to the calls of crickets outside. The gentle sigh of the wind through the trees and the faint lapping of water on the shore. She closed her eyes and thought about how different this place felt from her old life. It felt honest and peaceful, a gift she had given herself after years of hard work in her dreams. She walked along the lake at sunrise. The dock was lined with lanterns, and neighbors gathered, smiling and sharing coffee. Children laughed as they dipped their toes in the water. Linda from down the lane handed her a basket of fresh eggs, and Mr. Jenkins brought homemade jam. They all greeted her like an old friend. Margaret woke from this dream with a soft smile, certain that this vision would come true. Early the next morning, Margaret rose to the first light. Without an alarm, she slipped outside in her slippers to stand on the dock. The lake was still, and a thin mist hovered above the water. She inhaled the cool air and felt gratitude swell in her chest. This was her new beginning. She was home. Margaret woke early the next morning with a sense of promise. But that promise soon shattered when she saw a crisp, white envelope pinned to her front door by a single nail. The paper looked official, with a bold heading that sent her heart racing. Notice of unauthorized occupancy. Her hands trembled as she took it down, and she read the words over and over. The Homeowners Association claimed her cabin sat on land that did not belong to her and demanded she remove all personal property furniture, garden plants, even the small boat docked within 30 days. Fines would mount each day she remained. And if she failed to comply, they warned, legal eviction proceedings would follow. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She had been so sure of her paperwork, so confident that her title was clear. How could this happen? She unfolded the notice carefully, seeking any mistake or loophole. There was none. The letter was signed by the HOA board president, a man named Harold Kane, whose name she had only seen in passing at a brief community meeting. Below his signature was a note. Please contact me immediately to discuss the matter. Inside her cabin, the morning light seemed harsh against the warm wood walls. Margaret's mind raced as she paced the room. What if they were right? If she really had bought the wrong parcel of land? She placed a trembling hand on the small wooden desk where her late husband's photo stood. David had handled the sale. He had insisted on a thorough survey and had reviewed the deed until he was satisfied. Could something have slipped past them both? The thought was almost too much to bear. She sat down and dialed the number printed on the letter. The phone rang once, twice, and then a gruff voice answered. "This is Harold Kane." His tone was polite but firm. Margaret introduced herself, her voice catching. She explained that she had purchased the cabin after careful research, and that her deed clearly described the property lines. Kane interrupted, insisting that the HOA's official map showed her cabin extending beyond her lot and encroaching on HOA-owned land, including the boat dock. He spoke of bylaws and easements as if they were iron bars that could not be bent. Margaret thanked him and hung up, her mind buzzing with questions. She paced to the window and looked out at the scene she loved, the cabin, the dock, the gentle lake beyond. It all felt threatened, as if the sanctuary she had built might disappear at the stroke of a pen. She sank into the armchair and covered her face with her hands, blinking back tears. How had a day that began with hope become clouded by fear and uncertainty? After a moment, she took a steadying breath and reminded herself that she had faced challenges before. She was a teacher, used to solving problems and guiding young minds through confusion until clarity emerged. Now she needed to apply that calm, logical thinking to her own situation. She picked up her purse and headed to the car. The county recorder's office was not far, and she needed to see her deed and any related documents for herself. The recorder's office was a small brick building with worn steps and a creaking wooden door. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polish. Behind a long counter sat a clerk who blinked at her over half-moon glasses. Margaret explained her situation, and the clerk led her to a public reading table where she could examine property records. Margaret spread out her deed, signed and notarized, tracing the boundary lines with her finger. The description matched the parcel she thought she bought from the gravel driveway to the water's edge, including the dock structure. She tucked the deed aside and asked to see any maps or surveys on file. A few minutes later, the clerk returned with a large rolled-up map and a printed property survey from 2005. Margaret unrolled the map carefully. It showed all lots in the HOA, each labeled with a number and bearing clear boundary lines. Her lot number was correct, and it extended exactly to the water's edge. The dock was noted as part of her lot. The printed survey matched the hand-drawn lines on the map. Margaret's heart lifted, but she knew maps could be misread, and the HOA might rely on a different survey. She asked to make copies of the documents and thanked the clerk. Back at her cabin, Margaret laid out the copies on the desk. She felt a surge of determination. She would not be bullied or frightened into losing her home, but she also knew she needed expert help to interpret the maps and present her case convincingly. She remembered the name of the surveyor who had worked on a neighbor's property last year, Luis Martinez. She had seen him carefully measuring and marking boundary stakes with bright ribbons. Margaret found his number in the HOA directory and called. Luis answered on the second ring. His voice was warm and friendly. She explained her predicament and asked if he could review the maps and deeds. He agreed to come by the next morning. Margaret felt relief. She spent the rest of the day gathering every paper she could find. The original deed, the county map copies, her purchase agreement, the HOA's welcome packet, and the eviction notice. She put them in a neat stack and marked each with a colored sticky note. Late in the afternoon, she decided to visit her neighbor, Tom Green, for advice. Tom had lived here longer than anyone she knew and had helped her settle in with tools and gardening tips. She walked down the grassy path toward his cabin, clutching her folder. Tom was working on a birdhouse in his front yard. When he saw her approach, he set aside his hammer and invited her in. Over mugs of refreshing lemonade, Margaret laid out her documents. Tom frowned as he read the notice from the HOA. "That doesn't look right," he said, shaking his head. He pointed to the deed and map, comparing them. "You own the dock and the land up to the water. I've walked those lines many times with my kids. They're yours." He paused. "It sounds like someone at the HOA office just didn't bother to check the right records." Margaret felt gratitude well up inside her. She told Tom about Luis coming the next day. Tom offered to be there too, if needed, and said he would speak on her behalf at the HOA meeting. Margaret thanked him. Having an ally who was known and respected by the community meant a lot. That evening, Margaret returned to her cabin and stood on the dock. The sun was low, and the water glowed with light. The wooden planks felt solid beneath her feet. She took a deep breath and promised herself she would fight for this place she had worked so hard to make her own. Inside, she prepared a light dinner and ate at the window table, watching the sky shift through shades of pink and purple. She wrote a note to Louise. "Thank you for helping. Meeting at 10 a.m. tomorrow." Then she drafted an email to the HOA board, politely requesting a copy of their survey and offering to meet in person to resolve any misunderstanding. She left space to attach the deed and map copies. Before bed, she took out her journal and wrote about the day's events. She described the shock of the eviction notice, the trip to the recorder's office, her meeting with Tom, and her hope that tomorrow's survey would finally clear the confusion. Writing helped her organize her thoughts and calm her mind. She closed the journal and slipped into bed, her heart still racing, but stronger with resolve. That night, Margaret dreamed of standing before a crowd of people in a meeting hall, maps in her hands and Louise by her side. The board president looked surprised as she laid out the evidence. Neighbors nodded and murmured in agreement. The tension melted away, replaced by applause. In her dream, Margaret felt proud and vindicated. She woke. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains. She dressed quickly and packed her documents into a briefcase. Outside, the lake was calm, and a single loon called across the water. Margaret paused on the dock, listening. She felt ready for whatever came next. With determination in her step, she climbed into her car and drove toward Luce's office, knowing that the fight for her home was just beginning, and that she would give it everything she had. ChatGPT said. Margaret arrived at Luce's small office just after 10. The morning sun shone through tall windows, lighting up rows of rolled-up maps and surveying tools. Luis greeted her with a warm smile. He was a tall man with kind eyes, and hands that looked steady and sure. "Good morning, Margaret," he said. "Let's see what we have." They set her folder on a long wooden table. Luis unfastened his glasses and leaned over the papers. He studied the deed first, running his finger along the typed boundary description. Then he picked up the HOA's eviction notice and frowned. "They're relying on an old map," he said. "It looks like someone used a survey from the 1970s. But the records were updated in 2005. Whoever read the bylaws missed that update." Margaret felt a rush of hope. "So the HOA's map is wrong?" she asked. "Partly," Luis said. "Let me overlay the maps and show you." He rolled out a large sheet on the tableland aerial photo of Crystal Lake from last year. Then he placed the county's 2005 survey map on top, aligning marks he had noted. With a pencil, he traced the lines. Slowly, the true boundaries appeared. Margaret's property, complete with the cabin, yard, and dock, clearly defined. Margaret swallowed hard and nodded. "It matches my deed exactly." Luis tapped the overlay. "Exactly. The dock is part of your lot." The HOAS survey missed the updated line, so they thought that section belonged to them. She pressed her lips together to hold back tears of relief. "What should I do next?" Luis smiled kindly. "We need to prepare a clear presentation. I can certify these maps, and at the HOA meeting, you can show them to the board. They should accept it once they see the evidence." Margaret felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Luis. You've given me hope." He nodded. "I'll prepare the certified documents for you by tomorrow afternoon." Margaret left Luce's office with a lighter step than she had in days. She drove back to her cabin, thinking about how important solid evidence could be. Inside, she placed the maps on her desk and stared at them for a moment. She pulled out her phone and called Tom. Tom answered on the second ring. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good," Margaret said. Luis confirmed I owned the dock and the land up to the water. He's certifying the maps so I can present them at the HOA meeting. Will you come with me? Of course, Tom said. I'll be there. We'll set the record straight together. Feeling buoyed by Tom's support, Margaret spent the rest of the day preparing. She sorted her papers into 3 piles. original documents, certified maps when they arrived, and supporting emails. She typed a short summary of the timeline purchase date. County records visit Luce's findings to hand out at the meeting. She printed copies for each board member and for neighbors who might attend. That evening, she visited a neighbor she had not spoken to yet. Mrs. Patel lived across the lake road. Margaret knocked on her door and was greeted by a gracious woman in her 70s. They chatted over chai tea and samosas. When Margaret explained her situation, Mrs. Patel's eyes widened. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said. "If you need me to speak at the meeting or show support, just ask." Margaret smiled. "Thank you. It means a lot." By the time she returned home, the sun was setting. She walked to the dock and stood on the wooden planks, looking out across the water. The wind stirred ripples, and a flock of geese flew overhead in a neat V. She felt ready. Early the next morning, a package arrived from Luis. Inside were 3 certified copies of the updated survey map, each stamped and signed. He had also included a short letter explaining the map's origin and how it superseded the HOA's outdated version. Margaret carefully put one copy in a brown envelope labeled HOA board, another copy for herself, and another she planned to give to neighbors who wanted to help. She spent the morning walking the property line with a bright ribbon, marking the corners where the land met the lake. She wanted a clear physical demonstration of her boundary. She invited Tom and Mrs. Patel to walk the line with her. They met on her front porch, holding notebooks and cameras. As they followed the ribbons, Tom asked questions about the measurements, and Mrs. Patel nodded in agreement at each corner. Margaret felt stronger with them by her side. At the last marker where the dock began, she touched the rail. "This is mine," she said softly. They all agreed and returned to her cabin. Over lemonade, they made a plan. Mrs. Patel would speak first at the meeting, offering her support. Tom would testify next. Then Margaret would present her documents and let the certified maps speak for themselves. They practiced how they would stand and speak, who would say what and in what order. Margaret felt a bit nervous at the thought of speaking in public again. But she had Tom and Mrs. Patel beside her, and that gave her confidence. That afternoon, she dressed carefully in a simple skirt and blouse, something professional but not stiff. She arranged her documents in a neat folder and placed it in her car. As she drove to the community center, her heart beat faster, but she reminded herself of Luce's maps and of Tom's promise. She breathed in slowly, remembering the calm she felt on her dock at sunrise. At the community center, the parking lot was nearly full. The building was a modest hall with a banner that read Crystal Lake Homeowners Association Monthly Meeting. Inside, folding chairs faced a long table where the board members sat. Margaret recognized Mr. Kane, the HOA president, and 2 other faces she had only seen at neighborhood gatherings. A gentle murmur filled the room as homeowners chatted. Mrs. Patel spotted Margaret and waved. Tom joined them, and together they approached the chairs near the front. Margaret's palms felt warm, but she kept her back straight. She handed out copies of the summary timeline to a few neighbors in the first row who looked supportive. Soon the meeting was called to order. Mr. Kane spoke about community improvements and then looked down the agenda. When he reached Margaret's name, he paused. "Next," he said, "we have a discussion regarding the property at 14 Pine Road, Margaret's cabin. Mrs. Harper claims an error in our records. She will speak first." He gestured toward her. Margaret stood, nodded politely, and tapped her folder. She took a breath. "Thank you, Mr. Kane, and thank you to the board and neighbors for allowing me to speak. Last week I received a notice claiming I occupy land not included in my deed, and that I must remove my boat dock. I believe there was a misunderstanding, so I visited the county recorder's office." She narrated the steps, the deed, the 2005 survey, and then Luce's certified map. At each point, she showed documents. Mrs. Patel and Tom gently nodded when called upon to speak. Mrs. Patel said, "I have walked the shoreline here for many years. I can confirm Mrs. Harper's boundary markers are correct." Tom added, I have lived here 10 years. I have the records of my own lot, and these certified maps match what I know to be true. Margaret then placed the certified survey map on the table. She gently unfolded it and pointed out the lines. Gasps rose in the room as neighbors leaned forward to look. Mr. Kane squinted at the map, fingers tracing the boundary. The other board members exchanged glances. A hush fell. Margaret said, "This map shows the correct boundary, and it includes the dock as part of my property. I ask that the HOA acknowledge this update and withdraw the eviction notice." "I have copies for each of you." She handed envelopes to the board members. Mr. Kane cleared his throat and stood. I see now that our records were outdated. On behalf of the HOA, I apologize for the distress this has caused. We will update our survey map and remove any reference to this land belonging to the association." He paused, looking at Margaret. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention and for providing such clear documentation." Margaret felt a wave of relief and pride. The neighbors applauded quietly. She smiled and nodded. From her seat, Mrs. Patel patted her hand, and Tom gave a thumbs up. Later, outside the community center, neighbors congratulated Margaret. Some said they admired her courage. Others were glad the HOA admitted the error. A few came to ask if they could borrow her maps when they bought property of their own. Margaret laughed and promised to share them. On the drive home, she felt lighter than ever. She parked by her cabin and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The dock, the lake, the pines, it all belonged to her. She walked down the ribbon-marked boundary one more time, breathing deeply. She had faced fear and won. Tomorrow, she would plant lavender in the boxes and build that birdhouse with Tom's help. But tonight, she would simply sit on her dock and watch the sunset, grateful for the home she had defended and the community she had helped bring together. Margaret stood just inside the door of the small meeting room, her papers clutched tightly in one hand. The atmosphere felt charged, as if everyone could sense that something important was about to happen. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. Mr. Kane, the HOA president, sat at the head of the long table, flanked by other board members. Their faces looked serious, some curious, some skeptical. Margaret gave a calm nod and laid her folder on the table before her. She began speaking in a voice that was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Thank you all for meeting with me today," she said. "I know your time is valuable. I'm here because I received a notice saying my cabin and dock were on HOA land. I believe this is based on an old survey. I have documents to show the correct boundary." She opened the folder and carefully pulled out the certified map from Louise. The map was crisp, lines clear, stamped with the surveyor's seal. Margaret unfolded the map and set it on the table so everyone could see. "This map," she told them, "is based on a 2005 county survey. It shows my property line running from the gravel road all the way to the water's edge, including the dock. I own this land." A hush fell over the room. Margaret waited, then pointed to the lines on the map. "Here is the boundary corner," she said, touching the spot near the second pine tree. "Here is the dock, and here the lake begins. My deed describes this same line in words. I brought my deed too." She slid the heavy paper across the table. One of the board members, a woman named Ms. Clark, leaned forward to look closely. "This seal is from your surveyor?" she asked, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Margaret nodded. "Yes. Luis Martinez is a licensed surveyor. He compared the old HOA map to the updated county records and certified this version. I have his letter here." She handed the letter to Ms. Clark, who read it aloud. The letter explained how the HOA's own files had failed to include the updated boundary. Once Ms. Clark finished, she looked at Mr. Kane. He cleared his throat and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Margaret's pulse raced. She knew some in the room felt sympathy, but she still feared a fight. She straightened her shoulders and added, "I hope we can correct the records today so I do not have to remove my dock or leave my home. I love this place, and I want to be part of this community." Mr. Kane leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. He studied the papers for a long moment, then looked up at Margaret. I admit I did not check the latest records," he said slowly. "Our map was from a survey done decades ago. I assumed it was still accurate. Apparently I was wrong. He looked around at the other board members. They nodded, some murmuring their agreement. The tension in the air began to ease. One by one, they turned the certified map this way and that, tracing lines with their fingertips. Another board member, Mr. Simmons, spoke up. We should update our bylaws to reflect this new map. I will draft the change and circulate it for a vote. Margaret felt relief wash over her. She allowed herself a small, sincere smile. But she knew this was not just about changing a chart. She wanted the board to understand how much this place meant to her and to the neighborhood. She cleared her throat. Thank you, I appreciate that. May I suggest that the HOA cover any costs I incurred in defending my property? I had legal fees, map copies, and even drove to the county office. Silence returned to the room. Margaret wondered if she had overstepped. But then Ms. Clark said gently, "Yes, that is only fair. You should not be out of pocket for an error the HOA made." She turned to Mr. Kane. "Do you agree?" He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and nodded. "Yes, we will reimburse Mrs. Harper for reasonable expenses related to this matter." He signaled to another board member. "Please make a note of that." Margaret exhaled. She felt the weight on her shoulders lift. She thought of the nights she spent worrying, the tears she had cried, and the drive she made to the recorders. Office before dawn. All of it led to this moment of acknowledgement. She realized then how important clear communication and proper records were to any community. Just as she was about to sit, Mr. Kane spoke again. "Before we move on, I want to apologize personally. I am sorry for the distress this caused you. It was never the intention of this board to threaten your home." His voice was sincere, and Margaret could see he meant it. She offered him a nod of thanks. The mood in the room softened further. Board members began asking practical questions. When will we hold a vote to update the bylaws? Who will handle the reimbursement? Do we need to inform all homeowners of the change? Margaret answered each calmly, her clear evidence guiding the conversation. At one point, a younger member of the board named Sophie asked, "Would it help if we held a community meeting to explain the changes and show the updated map?" Margaret thought that was a good idea. She replied, "I would welcome that. It's best for everyone to understand where their property lines are." We could include a Q&A session, they agreed. Plans were made to send letters to every homeowner, with a copy of the updated map and a notice of a special community meeting. Margaret found herself caught up in the organization, helping to draft the letter and suggesting times that would work for most people. She felt proud to contribute, not as an outsider in conflict, but as a neighbor helping to strengthen the community. When the board meeting adjourned, Mr. Kane shook Margaret's hand. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention and handling the matter so professionally," he said. "We look forward to having you as an active member of our HOA." Margaret smiled and felt warmth spread through her chest. She had come seeking vindication, and instead found an opportunity to be part of something bigger, to help her neighbors and ensure fairness. As she gathered her papers, many board members stood to wish her well. Some patted her shoulder. One even joked that they were glad to finally know where their own docs should go. After she stepped out of the meeting room into the bright afternoon sun, Margaret paused. The light felt different now, brighter, as if it recognized the victory for what it was. She glanced back at the building where she had once been threatened with eviction, and she felt a surge of gratitude for the chance to set things right. She walked to her car, spotting Tom and Mrs. Patel waiting. They greeted her with smiles and applause. Tom gave her a thumbs up and said, "You did it." Mrs. Patel handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from her garden. "These are for you," she said softly. "For courage and for home." Margaret held the flowers and felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Tears of relief, of pride, of joy. She realized this challenge had brought her closer to the people around her. It had turned uncertainty into unity, conflict into cooperation. The lake cabin that once felt fragile under threat now felt more anchored than ever, held firm by truth and community spirit. As they drove back along the winding road to Crystal Lake, Margaret felt the late-day light shimmer on the water. Thought of the picnic tables she might set up here for neighbors, of the birdhouse Tom had promised to help build. It's a laughter that would echo across the dock in the summer months. She knew this cabin was her sanctuary. But now she also knew it was a place where friends gathered and where issues could be solved together. That evening, back at the cabin, Margaret set the wildflowers in a mason jar on the mantel. She turned on a soft lamp and sat in her armchair with a cup of chamomile tea. Outside, the lake was calm, and the first stars appeared in the sky. She thought about the board meeting and the words of apology and promise. She thought about her own words, spoken with calm and clarity, and how they had made a difference. Margaret sipped her tea and let the warmth spread through her body. She felt contentment settle in her heart. She had faced her fears, stood up for her home, and in doing so, had helped her community become stronger. She knew the rest of this story. Part 5 would be about new beginnings and unity. But for now, she was simply Margaret Harper, proud homeowner and thankful neighbor, ready to enjoy the peace she fought to keep. Margaret woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains. She stretched and smiled, remembering yesterday's victory. The world felt soft and gentle as she slipped into her slippers and walked to the kitchen. She boiled water for coffee and glanced at the wildflowers on the mantel. Her bright petals reminded her of kindness and support. Outside, birds chirped and the air felt fresh. She carried her mug onto the porch and settled into the armchair, cradling the warmth. The lake lay before her, calm and shining. She felt a deep gratitude for this place and for everyone who had helped her protect it. After breakfast, Margaret stepped outside with a trowel and small pots of lavender seedlings, knelt by the flower boxes under the windows and planted each tiny plant with care. As she worked, she thought of how a small seed could grow into a strong, fragrant flower. Community, she realized, was much like that small acts of help could grow into lasting friendships. She filled the boxes with soil, patted it gently, and watered them from a tin can. The purple leaves glistened in the sun, and Margaret felt joy bloom inside her. Later in the morning, Tom drove up in his blue pickup, tools rattling in the back, stepped out wearing a wide smile. "Ready for that birdhouse?" he asked. Margaret laughed and said yes. They unloaded wooden planks, nails, and tools. Tom showed her how to measure and saw carefully. Together they cut pieces and assembled the frame. Margaret held the boards steady and hammered nails under Tom's patient guidance. Took shape, they shared stories and laughter. When it was finished, they painted it bright red with white trim. It looked cheerful, like a little house for feathered guests. With the birdhouse ready, they carried it to a tall pine near the shore. Tom helped Margaret climb a small ladder while she held the birdhouse steady. She attached it to a sturdy branch with wire and stepped back to admire their work. "Soon, we'll have bluebirds or chickadees moving in," Tom said. Margaret felt a warmth of pride. She patted Tom on the shoulder and thanked him. He tipped his cap and waved goodbye. As he drove away, Margaret watched the truck disappear down the road, feeling grateful for a neighbor's help. That afternoon, the community gathered at Margaret's cabin for the first annual Crystal Lake Day. Tables sat under a canopy of pines, covered with homemade dishes, potato salad, fruit pies, vegetable trays, and fresh bread. Neighbors arrived, carrying chairs, coolers, and smiles. Mrs. Patel brought spicy samosas and chai. Mr. Jenkins carried a batch of his famous peanut butter cookies. Margaret welcomed each person, offering drinks and guiding them to seats. Children ran barefoot on the grass, chasing butterflies and flying kites. Laughter filled the air like music. At the edge of the gathering, Mr. Kane and the other HOA board members arrived. He walked up to Margaret and shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for hosting this," he said. "It's wonderful to see everyone together." Margaret nodded and smiled. She introduced him around. The mood was relaxed and joyful. People chatted about their gardens, their plans for the summer, and the peaceful beauty of the lake. For the first time, some neighbors met each other beyond quick hellos on the road. Friendships sprouted like new shoots in spring. After the picnic, everyone moved toward the dock. Margaret invited neighbors to walk out on the wooden planks and glance at the map she had framed. She pointed out the boundary lines and told the story of how the community came together to correct an old mistake. The children gathered around, listening wide-eyed to the tale of maps and surveys. Even the youngest seemed proud that their grandmothers and grandfathers worked hard to protect their homes. Adults nodded and murmured appreciation for Margaret's calm strength and clear thinking. As the sun dipped lower, some neighbors brought acoustic guitars and small drums. A few sang folk songs, while others joined in humming along. Mrs. Patel taught a lilting song in her native language, and some picked up the tune. Margaret sat on the dock's edge, her feet dangling above the water, listening to music in unity. The golden light danced on the lake's surface, making everything glow. She felt that this moment, simple yet profound, was the true reward of her efforts. When twilight settled, lanterns flickered along the path to the cabin. Margaret invited everyone inside for slices of pie and mugs of hot cider. They crowded around the little kitchen, sharing stories and homemade recipes. Margaret served diamond-shaped pieces of berry pie, and neighbors praised her cooking. Even Mr. Jenkins, often quiet, complimented her on the crust's perfect flake. Margarita handed out extra napkins and laughed at a joke Tom told, feeling warm inside. By the end of the evening, only a few friends remained. They stood on the porch, wrapped in shawls and sweaters, admiring the stars reflected in the lake's dark mirror. Mrs. Patel placed a gentle hand on Margaret's arm. "You have done so much for all of us," she said. "You reminded us that we are stronger together." Tears gathered in Margaret's eyes. She shook her head and whispered, "I only did what anyone else would do for a neighbor." But inside, she felt proud and humbled. When the last guests drove away and the lanterns dimmed, Margaret locked her door and crossed to the dock one more time. The night air was cool and still. She sat on the edge, rocking gently. The birdhouse they built swayed in the breeze overhead. Margaret closed her eyes and remembered the journey from peaceful beginnings to fear and to victory, and now to celebration. She felt content and hopeful, knowing that challenges could be solved with kindness, clarity, and help from friends. Before going back inside, she whispered a quiet thanks to her late husband, David, to Luis and Tom and Mrs. Patel, and to every neighbor who stood with her. Then she stood and walked back up the steps. Inside, she poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in her armchair by the writing desk. She picked up her journal and wrote down many pages: the day's smiles, the songs, the taste of pie, the glow of lanterns. She closed the journal with a satisfied sigh and placed it on the desk. Margaret switched off the lamp and lay down, tucking herself under the warm quilt. Outside, the loons called softly across the water, and the trees whispered in the breeze. She closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that her lake cabin was safe, and that her community was stronger and more united than ever. In her dreams, she walked along the shore at sunrise, joined by friends old and new, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring together.